Well, good morning and welcome to Tuesdays with the Pilgrim as we continue reading Harold Bell Wright's book, The Shepherd of the Hills, with Chapter 15, The Party at Ford's. Young Matt would have found some excuse for staying home the night of the party at Ford's, but the shepherd said he must go. The boy felt that the long evening with Sammy would only hurt. He reasoned with himself that it would be better for him to see as little as possible of the girl who was to marry Ollie Stewart. Nevertheless, he was singing as he saddled the big white-faced sorrel to ride over the trail that is nobody knows how old. Mr. Lane was leading the brown pony from the stable as young Matt rode up to the gate, and from the doorway of the cabin Sammy called that she would only be a moment. "Ain't seen you for a coon's age, boy," said Jim, while they were waiting for the girl. "Why don't you ever come down the old trail no more?" The big fellow's face reddened as he answered, "I ain't been nowhere, Jim. 'Pears like I just can't get away from the place no more. We're that busy." Sammy's father looked his young neighbor squarely in the eye with that peculiar searching gaze. "Look here, Grant, I knowed you ever since you was born, and you ought to know me a little. 'Tain't your way to dodge, and 'tain't mine. I reckon you know you're welcome, same as always, don't you?" Young Matt returned the other's look fairly. "I ain't never doubted it, Jim, but things is a heap different now, since it's all done and settled with Ollie gone." The two understood each other perfectly. Said Jim, drawing a long breath, "Well, I wish you'd come over just the same anyway. You can't do nobody no harm as far as I can see." "Wouldn't do me no good," replied the young man. "Maybe not," said Jim, "but I'd like mighty well to have you come just the same." Then he drew closer to his young friend. "I've been aiming to ride over to see you, Matt, but Sammy said you was a-comin' this evening, and I 'lowed how this would be soon enough. I reckon you know what Wash Gibbs is a-tellin' he aims to do first chance he gets." The giant drew himself up with a grim smile. "I heard a good bit, Jim, but you don't need to mind 'bout me. I know I ain't quite growed, but I'm a-growin'." The older man surveyed the great form of the other with a critical eye, as he returned, "Darned if I don't believe you'd push him mighty close, if he'd only play fair. But I 'lowed you ought to know what's a-comin'." "I've knowed it for a long time," said the other cheerfully. "But I heard a preachin' Bill say once that if a feller don't fuss about what he knows for sure, the things he don't know ain't apt to bother him none. It's this here a-guessin' that gets a man down." "A preachin' Bill hits it every pop, don't he?" exclaimed Jim admiringly. "But there's something else you ought to know, Matt. Wash has done made his threats agin the old man down there." "You mean Dad Howitt?" said young Matt sharply. "What's Wash got agin Dad, Jim?" Mr. Lane shifted uneasily. "Some fool notion of his'n. You mind old man Lewis, I reckon." The big man's muscles tightened. "Dad told us about his a-stoppin' at the ranch the t'other day. Wash Gibbs better keep his hands off Mr. Howitt." "Ain't told nobody about this, Grant, and you can do as you like about telling your father and the old man, but if anything happens, you get word to me. Quick." Before more could be said, Sammy appeared in the doorway, and soon the young people were riding on their way. Long after they passed from sight in the depths of the forest, the dark mountaineer stood at the big gate, looking in the direction they had gone. Young Matt was like a captive, tugging at his bonds. Mr. Lane's words had stirred the fire, and the girl's presence by his side added fuel to the flame. He could not speak. He dared not even look at her, but rode with his eyes fixed on the open ground, where the sunlight fell in long bars of gold. Sammy, too, was silent. She felt something that was strangely like fear when she found herself alone with her big neighbor. Now and then she glanced timidly up at him and tried to find some word with which to break the silence. She half wished that she had not come. So they rode together through the lights and shadows down into the valley, the only creatures in all the free life of the forest who were not free. At last the girl spoke. "It's mighty good of you to take me over to Mandy's tonight. There's no one else I could have gone with." There was no reply, and Sammy, seeming not to notice, continued talking in a matter-of-fact tone that soon, for such is the way of a woman, won Matt from his mood, and the two chatted away like the good comrades they had always been. Just after they had crossed Fall Creek at Slick Rock Ford, some 2 miles below the mill, young Matt leaned from his saddle and for a little way studied the ground carefully. When he sat erect again, he remarked with an air of one who had reached a conclusion, "Wouldn't wonder but there's gonna be a doin's at the Fords tonight, sure enough." "There's sure to be," replied the girl. "Everybody'll be there. Mandy's folks from over on Long Creek are coming, and some from the mouth of the James. Mandy wanted Daddy to play for him, but he says he can't play for parties no more. They got that old fiddlin' Jake from the Flag neighborhood, I guess." "There'll be something a heap more exciting than fiddlin' and a dancin', according to my guess," returned young Matt. "What do you mean?" asked Sammy. Her escort pointed to the print of a mule shoe in the soft soil of the low bottomland. "That there's Wash Gibbs' done mule, and he's a-headed down the creek for Jennings still. Wash'll meet a lot of his gang from over on the river, and like as not they'll go from there to the party. I wish your dad was a-gonna be playin' at the party tonight." It was full dark before they reached the Ford clearing. The faint, faraway sound of a violin, seeming strange and out of place in the gloomy solitude of the great woods, first told them that others had already arrived. Then, as they drew nearer and the tones of the instrument grew louder, they could hear the rhythmic swing and beat of heavily shod feet upon the rough boards of the floor. With shrill cries of the caller and half-savage, half-pathetic sing-song of the backwood dancers singing Missouri Gal. Reaching the edge of the clearing, they involuntarily checked their horses, stopping just within the shadow of the timber. Here the sound of the squeaking fiddle and the shouting caller, the stamping feet, and the swinging dancers came with full force. And through the open door and windows of the log house, they could see the wheeling, swaying figures of coatless men and calico-gowned women, while the light streaming out opened long lanes in the dusk. About them in the forest's edge, standing in groups under the trees, were the shadowy forms of the saddle horses and mules, tied by their bridle reins to the lower branches. And nearer to the cabin, 2 or 3 teams, tied to the rail fence, stood hitched to big wagons in which splint-bottomed chairs were placed for extra seats. During the evening, the men tried, in their rough, good-natured way, to joke with young Matt about taking advantage of Ollie Stewart's absence, but they very soon learned that while the big fellow was ready to enter heartily into all the fun of the occasion, he would not receive as a jest any allusion to his relationship with the girl whom he had escorted to the party. Sammy, too, when her big companion was not near, suffered from the crude wit of her friends. "Ollie Stewart don't owe me yet," she declared, with a toss of her head, when someone threatened to write to her absent lover. "No," replied one of her tormentors, "but you ain't aimin' to miss your chances of a-goin' to the city and live with them big bugs." In the laugh that followed, Sammy was claimed by a tall woodsman for the next dance, and escaped to take her place on the floor. "Well, Ollie sure enough made a good man for her," remarked another joker. "If he don't walk the chalk, she can take him across her knee and wallop him." "She'll surely marry him all right," said the first, "'cause he's got the money, and she's going to have a heap of fun making young Matt play the fool before she leaves the woods. He ain't took his eyes off her tonight. Everybody's laughing at him. I notice they take mighty good care to laugh behind his back," flashed little black-eyed Annie Brooks from the Cove neighborhood. Young Matt, who had been dancing with Mandy Ford, came up behind the group just in time to hear their remarks. 2 or 3 who saw him within hearing tried to warn the speakers, but while everybody around them saw the situation, the 2 caught the frantic signals of their friends too late. The music suddenly stopped. The dancers were still. By instinct, every eye in the room was fixed upon the little group, as the jokers turned to face the object of their jests. The big mountaineer took one long step toward the 2 who had spoken, his brow dark with rage, his huge fists clenched. But even as his powerful muscles contracted for the expected blow, the giant came to a dead stop. Slowly his arm relaxed, his hand dropped to his side. Then turning deliberately, he walked to the door, the silent crowd parting to give him way. As the big man stepped from the room, a gasp of astonishment escaped from the company, and the 2 jokers with frightened faces broke into a shrill, nervous laughter. Then a buzz of talk went around. The fiddlers struck up again, the callers shouted, the dancers stamped and bowed and swung their partners as they sang. And out in the night under the trees, at the edge of the gloomy forest, the strongest man in the hills was saying over and over to the big white-faced sorrel, "I don't dare do it, I don't dare. Dad Howitt wouldn't, he sure wouldn't." Very soon 2 figures left the house. They hurried toward a bunch of saddle horses nearby. They had untied their animals and were about to mount, when suddenly a huge form stepped from the shadows into their horses' path. "Put up your guns, boys," said young Matt calmly. "I reckon you know that if I'd wanted trouble, it would have been all over ever before this." The weapons were not drawn, and the big man continued. "Dad Howitt, he says a fella always whips himself every time he fights when there ain't no principle involved. I don't guess Dad would see airy principle in this, 'cause there might be some truth in what you said. I reckon I am something at playing the fool, but it would have been a heap safer for you to let folks find it out for themselves." "Well, we was just a foolin', Matt," muttered one. "That's all right," returned the big fella, "but you better tie up again and go back into the house and dance a while longer. Folks might think you was a-scared if you was to leave so soon." And that's the end of Chapter 15. We'll continue next week with Chapter 16, On the Way Home. Until then, take care, stay safe, and God bless.